The shrapnel is just flying everywhere.
In a blink, it's over.
People are trying to figure out what has happened, all the screaming, there's fires that are burning.
And Abdullah, his car was torn up. He had shrapnel in his face.
2 wounds in his face, one in the right hand, left thigh, one in the back.
And he says that once he saw there was smoke, his first thought was, where's my son?
He was looking for his son.
His son was there? Yeah, a young man who had been a few cars back from him.
He had the 4th car on convoys, and he was married with 2 boys and 1 daughter.
Abdullah said he could move, so he got out of his car and stumbled back toward the 4th car to find his son.
Yeah, he said he found him just next to the car before he died. تكلمت ما أنت وياه؟ No, he didn't talk to him. Just he looked at him and just passed away.
So it turns out that there are 12 dead. And typically what happens in Yemen is that as soon as someone is killed, they're buried very, very shortly thereafter. What happens here is something different. The people in the convoy take the bodies of the dead and they take them back to Rada,
this big town near where the drone strike occurred.
There's a video I have.
That's what you're hearing, where you see some men take these 12 dead bodies
and they line them up in the street on this bright blue tarp, and they sort of wrap them in these cheap blankets. And so there's this huge crowd that just gathers around to stare at these dead bodies who are laid out in the street.
And at a certain point,
this very tiny, very leathery old Yemeni who's sort of holding on to the back of a pickup with one arm.
He stands over the dead,
sort of swaying over the bodies and just lecturing the crowd on what happened. He's just screaming at them. And so you can hear his voice start to go hoarse. And he's screaming, an American drone killed these. It was a massacre. These people are on their way to a wedding. Why did this happen? Why were they killed?
Why did they target this convoy?
Well, according to the U.S. government, they had received intel that on that day, in this convoy, was an al-Qaeda operative
named Shawki al-Badani,
who apparently had been planning attacks against the U.S.
That's why they took the shot. And in fact, they say that he was wounded in this wedding convoy strike.
And do we have any reason to believe that?
I have no reason to believe it.
Greg spent weeks in Yemen, talked to survivors of the drone strike.
Talked to people who were there. No one knows this guy.
And Greg says the guy isn't really a member of either of the tribes that were involved in the wedding. And so to him,
it makes no sense that he would be there.
To him, this was a terrible mistake. But what really got me interested in Greg's reporting, which you can read on BuzzFeed.com, highly recommend it, is that he goes really deep into the question of, like, what the U.S. did next. Because the question is, like, what do you do in this case? How do you repair something like this when you have two totally different cultures with two different traditions? How do you find a way to try to make this right?
Can you?
No.
I mean, historically, do soldiers have an obligation to repair the damage they do?
No, there's no obligation. But what's happened is we've actually created an obligation for ourselves.
In Americans have?
Yeah. This has a really long history. A history that's
You mean
rooted...
legally?
Yeah. A legal history.
Really?
And there's a great law professor at Yale.
What's his name?
His last name is Witt. It's John Witt.
That's me.
We ended up tracking down John Witt.
Hi, Jed. How are you?
To talk about how the U.S. first started to try to right the wrongs in war.
So, what is the foundation story of all this?
That starts with General Pershing in World War I.
So, 1917.
America is called to arms.
The Great War ramps up, so we start shipping young men,
Thousands of them, and millions more to follow.
over to Europe. specifically France. And in charge of these men was a man named John Jay.
Commander of American forces on the Western Front.
Stern man, handsome mustache, bit of a maverick.
General Pershing's nickname was Blackjack, and
When he first arrives in France with his troops, General Blackjack Pershing,
he's got this problem, which is that he has jeeps.
Built in America, shipped to France, and manned by our men.
So World War I is the first war in which the U.S. Is shipping a lot of automobiles
more than 100,000.
for the soldiers to drive.
Cars, trucks, jeeps.
And jeeps are really great. They get his men from one place to another.
From Paris to Amiens to, I don't know, Marseille.
But they also run into French farmers' chickens and cows, children, sometimes just the farmers themselves.
Were these random collisions, or were there no roads?
I'm going to bet there was some of everything. Sometimes it was probably just ordinary car accidents, and sometimes, no doubt, a little French wine was involved.
So this is Pershing's problem. He's trying to run a war overseas.
And it wasn't any good for him to have grumpy civilians at his rear.
And so Pershing has an idea, which he actually borrows from the Brits, and that is he will use
Cash.
money to right our wrongs.
Well, and so he goes to Congress and begs for a statue. And Congress obliges really quickly. There's no sign this is a controversial thing.
But it was a genuinely new thing, because for the first time in the history of war, as far as we could tell, you had a state compensating individuals. Usually it's state to state. Here you have state to individuals. And so the U.S. government starts systematically paying money for the loss of a non-American life in war.
How much?
Geez, I don't know.
It's actually surprisingly hard to find documentation mentioning specific amounts, but whatever the amounts were, it seems to have worked. Pershing wrote in his biography that the swift and prompt settlement of claims had a great effect upon the people. So it seemed to work really well.
And is this, I mean, is the idea here that, like, this is what we would do with the drone strike victims we talked about, that we pay them money?
Well, it's a bit trickier than that, because the thing that Pershing got in World War I, it came with a catch.
And that is that there's a combat exclusion.
In case you just walked in, that's Gregory Johnson. And what he means is that this law, basically what it said is that we'll pay your claims if it didn't happen on the field of battle and it wasn't a combat situation. If it was combat and it was on the field of battle, then tough luck. That's just war.
So if U.S. soldiers were driving to a fight and they ran their car into somebody and they damaged that car or killed that person, those people would not be able to get compensation. Whereas if the U.S. soldiers were driving to a bar and got in an accident, they would be able to get compensation.
But the problem is, once we get into these counterinsurgency wars,
Civilians are suddenly in the middle of the fray.
Charges have been made that troops killed as many as 567 South Vietnamese civilians during a sweep.
this is in a way the story of modern warfare.
Air raid sirens are beginning to sound over Baghdad.
President Karzai says he's delivering his final warning to the U.S. after a U.S. airstrike accidentally killed more than a dozen mothers and children.
By the time we get to Afghanistan and Iraq, the fighting is happening in cities, so there's no difference really between the battlefield and where people live. And so the line between what's combat related and what's not combat related, it starts to get blurry.
And so in 2003 in Iraq, what happened was there were actually people lining up. There were civilian military operations centers. People started lining up outside of these saying, my family has been harmed. I want help.
How many people do you remember?
If I had to guess, it was, maybe around 80 people or so.
That's a ton of people.
Yeah.
That's John Tracy. He was a military lawyer in Iraq in 2003. And before him, Marla Keenan.
I'm managing director of Center for Civilians in Conflict.
So when they came with a complaint, what sort is it? Like you ran over my chicken, or you knocked out my windows?
No.
or you-
Much more serious.
I mean, I think of cluster bombs. During the shock and awe campaign, one of the types of bombs that we were using, or the Air Force was using, were what they call cluster munitions.
Basically, John says Air Force planes would fly over these targets and drop hundreds and hundreds of these tiny little bombs,
Bombs smaller than a Coke can.
and a lot of them would land in maybe a parking lot or a field, and they wouldn't explode.
So on a number of occasions, you'd have, mostly it was kids, right? Because the kids would see it and
They didn't know any better.
they would just run over and kick it. And then that's when it would explode.
That's when it would
Um,
detonate.
Right.
Huh.
I had a lot of those, close to a dozen. And so that was a difficult one because, well, it's combat because the Air Force dropped it because they were, bombing the city.
Right.
But at the same time, days, weeks, even months have gone by, and this thing is just sitting in the ground. Couldn't we say it's not combat?
And this was a real question that John had to ask his boss, and then his boss asked his boss.
They eventually sent the question up to the Army Claim Service, and they said, no, it's combat.
Meaning they're not going to pay.
Basically, like, we are in an armed conflict, and this was an unfortunate incident, but an incident that happened during a lawful combat operation, and therefore, we're sorry. And that's basically it.
So I said no to a lot of people.
And so, like in World War I, with General Pershing, military officers, they started lobbying their bosses for an expanded system so they could start making more payments. And eventually the military does expand it. In fact, I talked to one of the military's top lawyers.
Brigadier General Richard C. Gross. I go by Rich. I'm the legal counsel to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And he told me that around 2006, paying out these kinds of condolence payments actually became sort of a key part of military strategy.
Absolutely.
Even had its own acronym.
MAWS, MAAWS. It's money as a weapons system, which, I'm not sure that title resonates with everybody, but
interesting phrase for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the idea that money can be used to win hearts and minds that help bring the population over.
And it just got me wondering, how much money makes a good weapon?
Well, I haven't, the U.S. military hasn't given me access to a database or anything like that, but through FOIAs and interviews, I've seen different numbers.
Marla says that in 2006, the ACLU filed a FOIA request and eventually got their hands on hundreds of claims files. And in those files, what you see are a bunch of different numbers, but one that comes up again and again.
$2,500.
$2,500 by and large.
Now, someone like John could have paid more, but that meant they'd have to run the claim up the chain of command.
Exactly.
So it was almost like there were these ceilings.
$2,500 for a life, $1,500 for property damage, and then eventually the property damage amount got raised to $2,500 as well. And that didn't make any sense to me. That somebody could get so much for a Toyota Corolla, but you were just going to get the same amount for a lost life.
I can't get over, $2,500 seems like just such a nominal amount. And the practicality of that money, of if you were to kill someone who is the breadwinner of a family, that $2,500 would not be able to support this family in any way.
Right. But we're not actually trying to pay full compensation, right? We're not trying to say, we think if this 20-year-old man had lived to be the average age in Afghanistan, that that it would have been $60,843, right? That's not the thing.
Do you ever, we had people who were killed here in an attack.
The federal government is one step closer to cutting its first checks to families of those killed and injured on September 11th.
And those people have been compensated.
Mm-hmm.
The levels of compensation to the New York victims is pretty high.
The range of payments for a death claim ranged anywhere from $250,000 to just under $7 million.
Do you notice that?
I do. I do. But
it is to a large degree comparing apples and oranges.
That's General Gross again.
Because you're talking about a legal system
where a country is paying their own victims
versus condolences in an area where there's no legal obligation to make those payments in the first place.
So that's a very different type of monetary payment.
Well, yes and no. Essentially, it's a person's life. And
yeah.
I think there's an argument to be made that there's an empathy in the number that you come up with, in the amount that you pay for someone's life.
I totally get what you're saying. The $2,500, I think it's any amount of money. If I told you 10, would you feel better about it?
I'd feel a little bit better.
You would?
I think so. 10,000.
What does it get you, though? In the end, $10,000 doesn't buy anything more back than what you lost.
I don't know what 10,000 gets you exactly in Afghanistan, but my assumption is that it gets you a lot more than 2,500.
But does that really help you? Is that really what you want?
Is the money unimportant to you, really? It sounds like the money's really...
I'm not a victim, so I don't know that I can answer that. To me, if it happened...
And at this point, Marla told us a story about how, before she got into this line of work...
I had several friends who were journalists.
One of those friends was a man named Chris Hondros.
Yeah, he's a photojournalist. He was a photojournalist.
And back in 2011, Chris was on assignment in Libya, moving with a rebel group, when they were fired upon, and Chris was killed.
Yeah.
And Marlon says when she found out that happened,
I wanted someone to explain to me why that happened. I mean, so I just wanted someone to explain. I didn't, I knew his family wasn't going to get any money. I knew that these guys that shot a rocket propelled grenade at him weren't going to care. No one was going to explain. But I wanted that.
And the money then becomes an occasion for you to say, like, not just I'm sorry, but here's what happened. It's the here's what happened part.
I think it's the token that's given with the apology and with the explanation.
But it's the apology and the explanation that matter to you.
Yeah, that's why we call it amends. Making amends.
One of the things that is true of money damages generally is there are desperate effort to find some common language between the party paying and the victim. Some Esperanto for communicating the meaning of what's happened in a language that the other side knows matters.
That's how John Witt puts it.
Because we see it everywhere we look. We see not just apologies, sometimes not apologies at all, but we see the almighty dollar, which is both distressing and also we know it's meaningful.
But the problem is, in order for that Esperanto to work, it has to say the same meaning to both sides. Which for John Tracy wasn't really about the money at all. Or not just about the money. It was as much about the envelope that the money was in. Or that there was a real person there to hand it to them.
I wasn't the one who raided their house. I wasn't the one who killed their daughter. But most of them, they, just wanted to look at somebody who's in a uniform and say, you really messed with my life.
And that opportunity is exactly what Abdullah Al-Taisi
ما هو الأهم الاعتذار ولا الدفع؟
will never get.
دفع ولا اعتذار؟ ما قاعد دافع إلا باعتذار.
His son was killed by a drone he never saw, operated by a man he'll never meet, on behalf of a country that still doesn't admit it was a mistake. And so the money he got,
مقتنع أنت بالدفعية اللي ادوكم إياها؟ لا كمالها ما يكفي.
which in the end he says was the equivalent of $30,000 US, way more than anyone got in Iraq or Afghanistan. Still, all he can do, without anything else to go on, is just compare amounts.
ولا هذا جانا واحد وطلب مننا قال هذا احنا نستلم في المقتول عندنا في امريكا ما معكم الا هذا واعتذروا لنا كان قلنا خلاص. Oh, he can accept that only if he gets like the payment equal to those to like in America how you compensate someone who lost his son, for example, killed.
If the payment was equal.
Yeah.
Producer Matthew Kielty.
Big thanks to Gregory Johnson, writer-at-large for BuzzFeed, who started us off on this adventure when he brought us the initial story.
And also thanks to BuzzFeed editor Steve Kandel.
And to Shaib Al-Masawa for helping Matt organize that interview in Yemen when the country's going through an awful lot of tumult, and he was able to get interviews that we didn't think he could get.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to him. Coming up, that's next.
Hi, Lulu here, and this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and as someone who reports on mental health, who likes talking to people about their mental health and what they look to in science, in the natural world, in faith, in friendship, wherever it may be, to help guide them through the rough patches of life, I just wanted to take a moment to say what seems to help people turn corners, find relief, get out of ruts, and even flourish is having someone with you. As much as we can feel private about our mental health struggles, you do not have to go it alone. So this May, why not treat your mental health to a buddy? And who better to talk to than a fully licensed mental health therapist? With over 30,000 therapists available, BetterHelp has someone you can talk to available at pretty much any time that's convenient for you at the push of a button. And because finding the help you need often depends on the therapist-client vibe, rest assured, with BetterHelp, you can switch providers at any time. Remember, truly, your mental health matters and you don't have to go it alone. Find the support you need anytime with BetterHelp. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/radiolab. That's betterhelp.com/radiolab.
On this week's On the Media, I spoke to the MAGA warrior who ended up defending the Federal Emergency Management Agency against the administration's assault.
He proceeded to berate me over the fact that the media got a hold of a story and was running a topic that they felt was too sensitive and not fit for public domain.
The topic was abolishing FEMA.
Correct.
You don't want to miss this one. Tune in to On the Media from WNYC. Find On the Media wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, now it's my left ear. Hello, Soren. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good.
Hey, I'm Chad Abumrad.
I'm Robert Krulwich.
This is Radio Lab, and so far we've been talking about the value of our lives.
And then the value of other people's lives.
Next up, the value of
Everything.
all of it.
Everything.
Everything. And by everything, of course, we mean
The value of nature.
that's Carl Zimmer, science writer, regular blower of minds.
So we think of ecosystems as just kind of sitting there, but actually they're doing things. If they weren't doing them for us, we would have to pay to do them artificially. For example, cotton farms in South Texas. So that, the farmers are doing their thing,
Like this guy.
James Parker.
planting their cotton, they're collecting it.
I farmed about, I don't know, usually 500 to 700 acres of cotton, so say 2,000 bales.
They're doing what farmers do.
I spend a lot of time on a tractor, and you have to check your water every morning, every evening.
Meanwhile, they have all this extra help in the air.
Yes.
They have bats
How many bats are out there, you really don't know.
flying all around. The bats eat the equivalent of 2/3 of their own weight in insects every night.
Wow.
They eat all night long, all kind of bugs.
A whole bunch of pests that would otherwise be eating the cotton.
Now, a few years ago,
A guy named John Westfall,
Did a calculation.
just to see how this arrangement was working out.
he came out to my farm and did a study. He had some college girls that worked for him, and those girls were out there all hours of the night listening to what the bats were saying. And
Each year, the farmers, collectively, they make about $4 or $5 million off of these farms.
The question was, how much of this was because of the bats? Because, bats are natural pesticides.
if the more they're eating, the less I got to spray.
And here's what the scientists figured out.
Out of $4 to $5 million, it was around $700,000 that you could ascribe to the bats.
It's just beautiful.
Wow. I mean, it does make me think that if you're those farmers, you should be compensating the bats somehow.
Yeah. It does give you a glimpse at the kind of scale of value, economic value, that nature has that we generally just totally ignore.
But we talked to a guy who didn't ignore it.
My name is Robert Costanza.
In fact, he took this way of thinking to the absolute limit.
Yes. So the question was, what's the value of all of these ecosystem services globally?
All the services on Earth.
It's bugs eating leaves,
Worms turning the soil,
beetles chewing tree stumps,
coral reefs protecting cities during storms.
everything.
We tried to synthesize all of the studies that had been done around the country and the world.
Like that bat study, except they didn't just look at cotton farms, they looked at
Tropical forests, rivers and lakes, coral reefs, coastal wetlands, inland wetlands, the ocean, woodlands, temperate forests.
It goes on and on.
Grasslands.
This must be some Excel spreadsheet.
It's kind of the Excel spreadsheet from hell.
It can get tricky.
So Costanza and his colleagues took all these different studies, summed them together, did a whole bunch of math, and came up with a number.
Which in today's dollars is $142.7 trillion per year of services. And that's more than all of the gross national products of the world.
Wow.
That's how valuable the services of nature are.
Yeah. Let me ask you, I get the way this would work with a bat, like the bat's eating the bugs, but how do you do it with a field or something? Do you just walk through and you're like, yeah, that's $20 of services, that's 50. How do you even figure out what the services are?
Well, they came up with a list. The list kind of depends on the ecosystem you're talking about, because different ecosystems provide different services. For example, a salt marsh.
And we are in the water now. We're in the water.
What is it? Wait, so a salt marsh, is it like the Florida wetlands but salty? I suddenly don't know what a salt marsh is.
Salt marshes are wetlands that are on the coast.
Got it.
Yep, we're standing in about a foot of water here. We're quickly approaching high tide.
We sent one of our producers, Simon Adler, to a nearby salt marsh.
Partially to haze it.
Your boots are much more water. Yeah,
really.
My name is Adam Welchel, and I'm the director of science for the Nature Conservancy.
And Adam gave Simon a kind of inventory of
Some of the services provided by coastal salt marshes. It's a stream of goods and services provided over time.
One of the things it does is it takes water that's coming in from inland and that's laden with all sorts of pollutants, all sorts of bad stuff.
The salt marsh will trap that water so that the pollutants settle, and then very often the marsh grass will suck up that water into the roots
and clean it up.
Yep.
So you could ask very simply,
how much would you have to spend to keep your water that clean?
Second. Well, there is one other study I want.
Adam Welchel said that scientists in New England have already figured that out.
For flood control, water supply protection, pollution control, it's roughly about $31.22 per hectare per year.
then you got to add the value of all the plants that feed the fish that end up on our dinner plates.
$338 annually per acre.
Then there are the bird watchers that buy lattes that support the local economy.
$490 per hectare.
And then there's habitat provisioning.
The list goes on and on and on and on.
You do get kind of obsessed with it. You start becoming an accountant and writing down numbers just furiously. It gets you to think about nature in a different way than you had before.
There's this galling element, though, or this aspect. Like when I first came across the...
At this point, our producer Tim Howard jumped into the interview, and you'll also hear our producer Soren Wheeler in just a second.
I do feel like in an example like the salt marsh, which cleans water, that's all reliant on people being there that need the water. So if you didn't have people there, does that salt marsh cease to have any value?
But Tim, haven't you ever had a conversation with somebody who just doesn't get? Like if you make the aesthetic argument, which is that nature should be preserved for its own sake, there's a whole category of humanity that just doesn't respond to that argument. This becomes a way to talk across the aisle.
But it does still feel like it demotes something of infinite value to something of a piddly value.
Well, it can't really be infinite value. I mean,
like a mother's love. You don't think your mother's love is priceless? I mean, you know.
Okay, I totally accept that there is this sort of priceless aspect of nature. But if you are in the government in a very poor country, you have some tough choices to make. If somebody comes to you and says, okay, you've got these lovely mangroves. Now, it turns out that this sort of setting where the mangroves are is the perfect place for shrimp aquaculture.
Because shrimp farms need lots of seawater, so it makes sense to put them by the sea.
We're going to put in these farms, we're going to grow shrimp. You are going to get millions and millions of dollars in tax revenue. If you're thinking about the welfare of all the people in your country, many of whom are starving, that might be a really powerful argument. Now, into that kind of a discussion, you can bring in the fact that these mangroves are sitting there very quietly doing all sorts of incredibly valuable things. In fact, they've done these kind of calculations. And in some cases, the services that mangroves provide are 4 times more valuable than what you could get out with shrimp. So it's stupid. It's just stupid in a very basic sense to wantonly replace lots of mangroves with shrimp aquaculture.
Is that a hypothetical situation?
No.
That's a conversation
that's what we're asked.
This is Glenn Marie Lang. She's an environmental economist for the World Bank, and she says very often she finds herself in exactly this kind of conversation.
Particularly, I work for the World Bank, so our primary clients are governments.
Philippines, Vietnam.
And when you're talking to a minister of finance and saying, you know what,
I know jobs are jobs, but you need those marshes. They have value.
They'll say, well, yeah, that's true, but that means I'm going to have to reduce the money that I put into the education budget. So you've got to really make a strong argument about the benefits. That's really where the rubber hits the road.
Well, I mean, that's it.
Here's the counter argument. It comes from Doug McCauley, an ecologist at the University of California, Santa Barbara.
The real danger is that we actually succeed, that we convince people that nature is valuable because it makes money, and then we're really in trouble in the many instances where it doesn't make us money.
What do you do in a situation, he says, where, say, a bunch of rivers are running dry and they're
quote, depreciating in value.
You know, by the same logic that you train me to think with, we should go out and liquidate these natural assets. That makes me feel really uncomfortable.
He says it's just kind of a weird way to think about nature.
We had a proposal here in the state of California to make gay marriage legal. And economists had a look at this legislation and said, this is expected to generate $163 million annually for the state of California. Well, it's good to know that. I appreciate having that information in front of me. However, when I'm making a decision on this legislation, and I would say that when many legislators, voters, average citizens are considering the issues at hand, they're not thinking about whether they're going to make $160 million for the state. They're thinking about a different set of values.
On the other hand, I want to say, and this is based on my experience working in developing countries, that when you don't put a value on these services, basically they don't get counted.
They get implicitly assigned a value of 0, according to Glenn Marie Lang. And as we were debating this and going back and forth, we bumped into a story about what happens when all of these value of nature ideas are let loose into a world of fruits and trees and human uncertainty.
The parable of the bees.
We heard this first from writer J.B. McKinnon, who says the story begins
in Mao County in central China, rural area, fairly remote.
Lush green mountains filled with apple orchards.
And apple orcharding was the main business.
And according to JB, in the 1990s,
the wild bees of Mao County slowly started to disappear. And there's a few different reasons given for that. It could have been the destruction of the habitat that the bees nested in, the heavy honey harvesting that wasn't leaving enough food for the bees.
But the prevailing theory is actually an economic one, because in the 1990s, as China was shifting to a market-based economy, apple producers were under pressure to produce more apples. So they started spraying pesticide.
Probably it was a constellation of all of those things and a few others. End result is the bees stopped buzzing in Mao County.
Which, if you are an apple farmer, that's a disaster.
As bees travel from flower to flower in search of nectar, they're dusted with pollen, which is the means by which flowers engage in sexual intercourse. So if you don't have the bees making the birds and the bees on the blossoms, then you don't get fertile flowers to turn into fruit.
And obviously, if you're a fruit farmer and you have no fruit to sell, you have no income.
So what do?
If you're an apple farmer and you don't have bees, then you need to find some other way to pollinate the flowers. And I guess they concluded, well, we'll have to do that ourselves by hand.
In Mandarin Chinese, we say 人工授粉, so basically that means a manual pollination.
This is Harold Thibault.
I'm a correspondent in China for the French newspaper Le Monde.
A couple of years ago, he heard about the apple farmers in Mao County, so he flies to Chengdu, and he and a friend hop in a car, and
we drive for like 5 or 6 hours until we reach this village, Nanxin.
Tiny little village.
It's like only a few houses. And then we took a small road between the fields, and we actually saw that there were lots of farmers in the trees, like on the apple trees,
straddling up on these often thin and spindly branches, men and women that I've seen in photos in any case.
Harold and his friend took pictures, and if you look at those pictures, you'll see the farmers holding a little brush.
This little pollen brush that they'd constructed using things like chopsticks and chicken feathers and cigarette filters.
And they'd have a little bottle filled with pollen, and then what they do, they dip the brush into the bottle and they paint a flower blossom with the pollen. They dip their brush back into the pollen and they paint the next flower blossom again, and they dip the brush back in again and they paint again and they dip again and they paint.
To make sure that all of the blossoms that they could possibly fertilize would be fertilized so that they would go on to produce fruit.
We're talking hundreds and hundreds of flowers per tree.
It's very strange to see humans doing the job of the bees.
God, what a pain in the ass that sounds like.
Yeah, the image of these Chinese orchardists standing up in these spindly trees traveled around the world through environmental circles, and the message that it seemed to send was that, you know, this is what happens if you lose biodiversity. You end up standing in the trees doing the job that the bees used to do on the wing.
For free.
But
then this guy enters the story. This is Yin Sun Chen.
Yeah,
human beings.
4 years ago, he traveled to Mao County to do a sort of economic analysis of just how much the loss of the bees was hurting the farmers of Mao County. But what he discovered, weirdly, was that the trees were producing more apples than ever.
More production. This can be confirmed. There are more production for hand pollination apple tree than a bee pollination apple tree. Humans are more efficient.
You mean the people were doing it better than the bees had been doing it?
Yes.
A lot better.
Fruit production went up.
Set your body free. Leave your situations at the door. So when you step
本频道由贩售高品质的环保，
然后加圈，这样子。这把枪是没有，那么飞机这样子就小，我们就用不到。那么这个螺丝侧边的这个固定胶对准这个细缝，这枪原本是黑色的，安装上去，这就是我这个的外观了，非常的棒。再来搭上这个弹夹，这就是我的完全体的外观。之后呢，我可能加上衬裙。那就是试试看这个 Black Ops Airsoft 的这个枪套能不能直接做使用，完全没有问题，严丝合缝。好，非常的棒。刚才呢，我看一看，又看到这个黑色螺丝的部分，然后我就想到我有另外一把枪是大脚星的那个嗨卡帕。这个大脚星的嗨卡帕很特别，你看到这边做个银色的这个握把螺丝。那如果把它拆下来换到这只上呢，会不会很适合？那我来试一下。那这边已经把它移植完成了。这个尺寸是 OK 的，可以看到这个螺丝搭上这个银色的这个滑套啊，非常的好看。那大脚星这支枪原本是黑色的，所以它用黑色螺丝其实也算是蛮合理的。那这个颜值真的是高啊，接下来就差一个衬裙，银色的衬裙。刚刚也看到这个 Victor Optics 的这个描述呢，我之前用一个保护套，但是我请我朋友帮我印的。那这边呢，他也有在帮我印一个这个保护套，这它是直接对着它做的，它可以直接把它扣上去，这边做的还不错。那把它扣上去之后呢，它可以对到这两个洞，然后去把它扣紧，这样子就可以在前面再加上一个保护片，把它粘上去之后，就整个是一个保护片的概念，可以拆卸。好，这就是整体这个外观。现在除枪以外的这个弹夹，弹夹呢，他们这次特别去重新开了模，弹夹已经不像以前一样，这是旧版的弹夹，这是旧版是它的这个增高的这个金额也是没有这个白点跟光纤的。对，后来我去查过，然后这支呢，它是19X。它不是歼5，它是19X的 MOS 的特制版，就是它不算是在歼5的这个系列里面，
所以你看Gen 5就有区别，就是 Gen 5的滑套前段呢会有这个再多一段止滑纹，然后19X 这边是没有的。那整箱的细节刻字呢，我比起19是有一个比较高的一个提升，差别就在于这个授权刻字 DA47861的这一个刻字的粗度呢，它明显的比这个是字是比较细的，那19呢它的字就是比较粗一点的，对。那各有所好，我是觉得都可以，但是有些人可能会比较喜欢17的这个比较小的字体。那我们来看一下19的字体，也就跟17一样，是一个比较小的字体，只是它刻的比较浅一点。那我们来看另一面的这个刻字，这一面的刻字呢，一样就是 Glock 19X， 对，这个刻字都是完整的，只是它差别就在于它是没有Gen 5的这个刻字的，对，因为它就是它也不是Gen 5系列的。整个握把的质感纹理呢，也到17的那个制成的感觉，就是做的比较棒一点。但是握把 Glock 的这个刻字，它有一点感觉变浅，不知道是不是因为沙色的关系，所以看起来比较浅。我印象中看17的感觉，这边是深刻的，而且字体是有点亮亮反光的。那就是这一次的握把这个 Glock 没有那么明显，这是比较小可惜的地方。然后再来呢，就是它的内构一样是非常的滑顺，后盾呢也一样是勾在这个飞机座这边。对，这完全没有问题。简单来说，这是19X 这次的产品呢，其实就是这个17的外观的更新版，就是它的这个做工，然后还有材质的这个外观，还有内构，基本上就是17，对，几乎是一模一样的。那前面我提到，有些玩家如果只玩瓦斯弹夹的话，可以去做一个优化，就是飞机的上段部分跟枪身接触的地方，能把它抛光就把它抛光，然后能上一点水性油就上一点水性油，然后把集水簧换成软一点的集水簧，就是不用那么硬。那这边是这支17，我是已经换过那个集水簧了。它的这个集水簧是比较轻一点的，轻轻就可以激发了。然后19呢，这个就是正常的，但是我不知道听不听得出来，就是直接听是听不一样的，这个力道是比较大的，然后17是比较小的，不知道影片上听不听得出来。好，那讲完外观的这个优点跟缺点之后呢，我们再来看一下内构的部分。首先呢，我们先试一下 TTI 的 Top 座，那么 TTI 的这个座来试试看可不可以装在19X 上面。因为之前19就有遇到过问题，就是 TTI 座在安装的时候会遇到有这两个凸点，就是附近两个座会干涉到这个滑套的拉动。那我试试看它有没有改进这个东西。我们放的这是有凸点的原厂样式的这个附近感固定座。好，那看来这是拉动是非常滑顺的，所以它是不会像19一样会干涉到这个拉动的问题。好，没有问题。那么我相信很多人觉得这个 TTI 的这个座价格算是有点偏高，那我就拿原厂的这个 Hub 座来讲，那我有听过一些就是大家。
大家好，这里是盖博黄店，今天给大家带来两款原装进口的翠金康小海螺4倍镜啊，我们来看一下它的型号来，这个是 TA31F 钢。
优点，我认为复刻镜也做到了用家的全息瞄准镜。令人兴奋的是，这次的复刻屏也是全息技术，可不是披着全息外壳的内红点哦。复刻镜的造型仿制 1XPS3-0，也就是最潮最酷的版本。那我们从右侧进行对比，右前方是电池仓，真仿品都使用一节 CR123供电，且两者电池盖是可以通用的。复刻镜也忠实还原防掉绳及防水欧环的设计。往后看可以发现归零旋钮，两者刻度提示同样满满。调整手感方面，真品阻尼手感适中，段落的间距也非常明显。提示音虽小，但仍清晰。复刻的手感表现就出问题了，调整上下的旋钮功能正常，但左右的旋钮存在比较含糊的手感，点到点之间要转动2响，有别于真品1响的设定。刻字方面，真品采一个低调路线，复刻镜则偏亮。接着看镜身后方，除了刻字随版本不同有所差异外，复刻镜出现一个 bug， 左侧外壳的间隙偏大，这点虽不影响使用，但就是一个差异点。镜身左侧就是控制界面，复刻镜还原真品浅显易懂的标示，这里也对比按键手感的差异。真品的键程适中，且从任何角度按压的力道都相同。复刻品虽然也还原按键回馈音，但手感偏软，很像是橡胶按键要掉进去的感觉。真仿品同样具有20段的 Daylight 和10段 NV， 可以利用上方按键切换 NV 档。而复刻的 NV 按键真的有功能按，但至少功能是没问题的，使用夜视镜实测后不会有过亮的问题。 下方的快拆夹具也是 EXPS 系列的特色，但不知是新品的关系或是品质不佳，复刻镜开关会有刺耳的摩擦声。以上就是左侧控制界面的介绍，接着看到前方玻璃，这里可以发现复刻镜是没有镀膜的，证明了它采用全息成像的技术。外观颜色由于黑色实在太无趣了，我特别冒着翻车的风险选择沙色款。这里可以看到复刻镜的颜色是多么的漂亮，室内光线的感受真的就以假乱真，绝非以前那种玫瑰金的土色可以比拟的。室外的表现我认为也是非常好看，不敢说颜色是否100%一样，但以质感看来已经让我无话可说。说了这么多，我们来看成像表现。首先由真品上场，这里容我使用 XPS2-0，由于真品 EXPS3-2 Radical 不同于本次复刻品，而且它也继承 EO 加优良的脱模传统，怕是表现各位会不买单。面对5到60公尺目标，使用 Micro 3x 放大观察，整个成像就是清楚2个字。透光的表现更不用多说，绝对不是假全息玩具可以效仿的。镜片品质也堪称一流，枝条、树叶及下方车牌皆保留细节。测试环境为正中午大白天，直接开到最亮来挑战真品的能耐。尽管是面对高光的天空，准星也依旧清晰，不愧是征战世界赢得一片掌声的产品。换个场景再看一次，EO 加的产品提供大视窗锁敌，面对复杂环境也能快速反应。68NOA 的外圈加中芯 1NOA 的 Radical 是其经典标配，实战效果更受全球用户一致好评。相信真品效果各位是有目共睹。再来我们换复刻品上场表现，同样的配置下可以看到复刻镜成像也是不落人后。我很想抓毛病出来，但真的很清楚啊，这透光表现也绝对非假全息能办到的。但还是有个美中不足的地方，各位请仔细瞧 1NOA 的中心点，不觉得 size 有点小吗？虽然最高亮度面对高光处的表现依旧亮眼，但最重要的中心点貌似不清楚，这已经影响到瞄准的可靠性了。这点我们稍后再用其他环境验证。同样在一个复杂场景，大视窗的优势以及所有 EO 加的优点，我认为复刻镜也做到了，用一半的价格做到一定程度的性能，这实在难以想象。白天的测试看过了，那我们来看夜间的表现。使用夜视镜观察不会有镜片吃光的问题，甚至还能看到 IR 雷射。但回到目前最重要的问题，中心点偏小导致低亮度无法瞄准，这点用夜视镜就能很好的体现了。是否能实战还需商榷。最后做的视差测试，两者测试都顺利过关。但请各位记得左边复刻镜的中心点尺寸，在看真品后你就会发现差异。最后分享一下我的想法，关于这颗复刻的真全息，我只能用意料之外来表达，完全没想到效果是这么的好，只要真品一半的价格就达成80到90% 的性能，但就如同影片所言，萎缩的中心点严重影响到瞄准的可靠性，在特殊环境绝对会成为使用者的绊脚石。而是否会如同我所说，还需更多用户实测，这点也欢迎各位分享看法。镜片透光可能因成本的考量没有如真品般透彻，但也赢过一票银膜虹膜的假全息了。至于可靠性是否如真品般优异，这点还需时间证明，未来遇到问题再分享给各位。那以上就是这次的评测影片，也谢谢出借瞄具的朋友，想谢谢他们的话可以按赞支持。那我们就下一支影片见了，拜拜。同场加印一下，脱模是否会影响
Switching gear. Okay, time for a sit rep. Our ship just went down.
Current position. Hold and await evac. The Master Chief and I are going to continue on ahead.
Roger! Okay, people. Evac bird's on its way.
Tongue and a taste of iron, sweethearts that high school sour now. Our time had grown to a closing. You moved when you ran out of money to stay. Your parents' house in Ohio, your old bed replaced with a treadmill now. What's left of our handprints now. shadow overhead. I've been sleeping with a cloud above my bed. I've been lonely for so long. Trapped in the past, I just can't seem to move on. I've been hiding all my hopes and dreams away, just in case I ever need them again someday. I've been setting aside time to clear a little space in the corners of my mind. All I wanna do is find a way back into love. I can't make it through without a way back into love. Oh. I've been watching, but the stars refuse to shine. I've been searching, but I just don't see the signs. I know that it's out there. There's gotta be something for my soul somewhere. I've been looking for someone to shed some light, not somebody just to get me through the night. I could use some direction, and I'm open to your suggestions. All I wanna do is find our way back into love. I can't make it through without our way back into love. And if I open my heart again, I guess I'll never be able to give up on you. So never say goodbye and kiss me once again. 真になっちゃえば私が古くなるじゃないあなたはすぐに絶対だろうという私はいつもそれを confusing term. How?
不要问他身材怎么可以这样长。国高中现在这样的很多，对不对？看动漫作品看闹钟，闹钟还要拿那种最传统的。现在谁拿这种闹钟？现在是手机就看一下就醒了，大家故意的然后醒来，我想要画的剧情连贯是这样：醒来，刷牙、洗脸、穿衣服穿鞋子上学，就这样子用线稿去串，但是又断了到这边就断了这是在那个更之前时期画也是有心要练线稿但是没有贯彻下去直到那个刚刚那个地狱神的那个才开始然后下面我们直接跳看，这个就是我画我自己的系列画那个我的那个九指饕餮那些，用后来的画线稿方式画，我就觉得好像练得可以了我线稿练回来了。这个时期我连彩稿都变了。我有没有琢磨在练彩稿？当然有啊，我从以前到现在无时无刻都会练彩稿，所有跟彩稿有关的，我连那个娃娃上妆的书我都买我是真的都有在锻炼，都有在学习，可是会卡着，卡的点在哪，我就是说不清楚，我自己都不知道。不管我做多少笔记，我的美感就是没变。我的美感就好像脸就是不好看，人就不好看，画面就是不好看，就是有问题。我一直不知道问题在哪，直到我线稿练回一个程度之后，我发现我连彩稿都变。这个时候我才赫然的发现我被老天打脸可能老 CG 之神在上面看这样，看不起线稿是吧？好，我让你低潮好几年，感觉上好像中了什么诅咒所以同学们，如果你们有人觉得，我上色细节不够，推荐你试一下线稿。那线稿当然要有一系列的练法好，那中间有些过场的我们跳过不看那当然，因为你线稿画的流畅之后呢，其实构图的时候呢也会变好。这是我画那个前年的圣诞节构图，就连你构图的想法、对形状掌握都加快它需要一些时间，但是它好处非常多。然后我更确定我画线稿的方式是从这张贞德开始，它是白贞德，我名字踢错了它是白贞德被靠起来，这是一种我现在画线稿方式的数绘画法，就用比较快的方式画。当然有这个版本，这个我还在实况画的，我记得我在实况画对不对就是把它改成这个版本然后在后面，因为我蛮喜欢 Fate， 虽然我不想去氪金玩，但是 Fate 角色很吸引我我有看了他的Zero 的动画，所以这个角色我也挺喜欢的。这个当他是那个 Fate Go 的然后呢，我就想这个，因为这已经用我现在的线稿在画了像去年的事画那这个是不是要一系列的改变这样子？它有后面一张不能点这个尼禄，我知道你们有看到小图，就看小图吧这尼禄然后我这个时候我用了线稿画法，我就觉得这个线稿就是我想要的然后我会非常懊恼，说为什么没有更早去回练线稿。有进阶版，也有在进阶，但那个不能点你们明白的后来呢，我有一系列我就都用这种线稿方式画，那我有发现到网友是喜欢的大家是喜欢的，我自己也开心，而且我觉得我在创作，它的成效不会逊于彩稿多少所以如果你们觉得自己也想经营自己的网络人气，一张一张彩稿在生，第一个可能画技进展不够快，都是画彩稿你进展会卡的然后如果用一点线稿去调和，其实你产图会快，再来你美感会提高，你对画面的判断能力会完全不一样。所以我必须对我中间那么多年看不起线稿这件事情，我要好好的忏悔来去拔不会这样这个我是用 Make 画的那时候就在试了一下用 Make 画那个，你们知道是谁的酒吞 那这个都可以画很快哦，就是画起来就是线稿变成我画图很舒压的方式啊。那后来就这是够我画的最后一张线稿，距离现在啊实况画的吧。描线我是后来自己描的，但是构图我是实况画的，应该有印象吧？实价对不对？好，那再后来线稿有没有再进化？有，运气非常好，我线稿又在改变。你们现在看到的这一些就是我今年的线稿，今年度的线稿。原本我还想说要不要那么麻烦，再试一下就是比较潦草的画法，这个是比较潦草一点的，因为我只是画我自己的题材嘛，那个九子系列饕餮，胸部最大就它。如果有另外一个女角，我九子系列哪一个可能臂系谁什么的，胸部不能大过它。要是不想画大了，就要把饕餮的再画得更大。我那时候定义是这样，没有人能够比饕餮大。当时有再试一下这个感觉，可是我觉得这个感觉是可以画得快一点，但是成效不够好。成效是指我看起来的那种流畅度好像不太好，没有那么好。所以呢，我就再调整一下画法。后来呢，就出现的，大概半年前你们看到是帮那个阴阳师画的那个这个时期的线稿算是就是我现在线稿就技法上想法上都很成熟这个呢就可以就完全是精线稿那这些精线稿带给我非常多的好处光是精线稿出来就是个作品。然后我也有私下问朋友，这样子东西集结成册卖得掉吗？他说可以啊，这个线稿很细啊，这样子那我觉得可以就是我本来都会怕说，如果我不画彩稿就不行这样，现在不怕了我可以靠线稿左拳威力强大连续的左拳然后后来当然就是我练这个，其实也想画自己东西的饕餮然后被砍这样这是我用漫画的方式画看看，因为既然线稿掌握的顺手了，那我就试一下画漫画吧。我那时候就空了一段时间空了2天，画了2页漫画，这是2页漫画，我用现在的线稿方式画，我来算它要多久时间，可以的，这个速度是可以的，而且还上效果而且2天没有画的多认真就是了就大概是建设下来，然后饕餮发现了，然后跟原生都跑开然后转头看到来自异邦的猎人然后饕餮生气这样子然后就打起来开打的但是有战斗画面的然后猎人射箭在这猎人怎么都这样这个往下画了就有机会给大家看，然后后来就打起来了然后打一打有一些比较 H 一点点的，在这里给你们看一下。这个我前阵子有拉进来给大家看过猎人就是要杀这些元神兽，就是这些九子他们是元神就是一种有魔力的生物然后在戴面具的都是猎人因为他们没办法吸这边的空气，然后这个猎人叫葛维亚压着他要把他剁死这样，我都有去慢慢推敲这些动作那这时候线稿已经画得我觉得已经很顺了我就很开心的那种能够用不一样的方式画漫画然后当然你们要是看那种纯日系漫画，我的流程照样能画，只是我看我要不要那样画，我想选择比较有我个人风格的方式画线然后再来我都有注意那个他的哪一幕我好像有注意到哪一幕，反正胸部都要有必须的对了，我这边有一幕我想要表现那个饕餮的膝盖顶着猎人的胸，后来没有画得很成功但是我算了不讲了这些都用线稿画。那线稿改变当然最大改变就是彩稿跟着变所以呢我后来像这个女王，这是上梯课的那个我在那个就是上一梯课发布之后我画的真的很快很 顺手，然后士兵，然后当那个 Wacom 数位版展示，画彩稿吗？当然画线稿给你咯，对不对？很快就有了，而且效果可以啊，对不对？好，所以后来我觉得线稿就是一个本命的东西哦，它会直接影响所有绘图技术，真的。所以回头讲，我原本讲工商讲的已经变成在讲故事了那你们就当听完吧我觉得这些是一个很重要的经历吧所以未来我要对线稿抱持着非常尊重的那种态度来画因为实在是他救了我一命吧不然的话我如果没有线稿调整我的美感跟对细节的看法，还有包含对所有画界的看法，我应该会卡在几年前，不会前进即使我继续练，也不会前进。所以有些时候人生就是有坎所以你们也会看到有些我这个比喻不是很恰当，但是我大概说一下，就是我一路画图以来，我有很多前辈的画技有些越来越好，但是普遍很多前辈的画技都停滞，就是我进这个行业，前辈画的怎么样？我经过这么10几年，前辈还是那样，例子很多。我上课不是有给同学看过一些案例吗？实话不好说嘛，对不对？但是我觉得重要的原因是，前辈可能没有找到属于他们的突破口，或者说他们对突破没兴趣吧。但是我自己的话是希望继续进步，所以幸好有找到这么大的一个突破口推荐给大家好了，说完了那因为没有步骤所以你们应该有周六练功，你们应该有机会看过我画那个就是线稿的流程但是好像都没描过可以看看这个步骤，它的核心价值在1、2、3这3个步骤，就是对啊，就草稿啊，画清楚一点然后科系啊，你这么想就错了你们要是这么想就错了，它当中有很多核心的地方那简单来讲，第一个动作最重要的是形状、位置。第二个动作重要的是什么呢？细节你想摆在哪？你细节要放在哪？哪边是你的细节的密集的地方？哪边要放空、放稀疏？疏密感收放在这边要确定，在第2个步骤要确定。第3个步骤当然就是依照你的原本定义好的就是那个细节疏密跟你的权重，在这边用需要的粗细线去画，然后封闭处去画。所以有些线你看我是用断的，很多线条是断的，因为这个地方适合一整块。但是为什么又要有线呢？就要暗示它有很多细节。那有些线很齐，像整张脸有没有耳朵什么，它非常整齐因为这边是不能容许出错的。但是还是会有些特殊案例，在脸颊上故意放洞，破一个洞，它还是有这种例子它有它的需求所以当懂这些东西的话，对彩稿颜色怎么上，那个你会有一番变化对经济压力，真正的经济压力。那我家又不是什么富二代之类的，我可以不用养家，没有我一退伍就要养家了就要给我妈钱了那我怎么办？要立刻来钱，漫画绝对不行。因为我那时候能够我有办法画漫画，我有得过漫画家新人奖，对不对？然后我也能够画插画，那哪一个人能够赚钱？插画漫画多久啊？漫画到有稿费进来要弄多久所以我那时候赶快先画插画，因为没办法我知道有很多同学对漫画有梦想，我相信，而你们现在的那个环境还是比我当时好我当时的那个漫画属于那种台湾，不要讲台湾了，就是真的是整个漫画生态的整个最低谷我不是出生在那种好时代好，那我退伍后呢，我需要赶快能够赚钱的话，画插画是最快的，而且画儿童插画是最快的，童书插画是最快的。这是童书插画，你相信吗？是我画的我画过这个今天下午在整理讲座需要的图的时候，看了什么叫黑历史，有可能有同学看过，没错，我这个开过几次，给人家看过，比这个黑的还是有，我真的没有脸拿出来 就是很黑这样哈。然后当时要画的这个呢，就是你说这是给小孩子看的吗？我说的童书都是给大人看的，你觉得小孩子会看吗？都是卖给大人的。小孩子有钱就偷偷拿去氪金的，还给你拿来买童书，怎么可能？都是给大人看，大人看，这个书对我们孩子会很好，小朋友看了会真的就是孝顺父母尊敬师长，然后努力学习大概都是家长认为对孩子有帮助，所以这个东西要画给大人看那我那时候画了很多你们还有谁看过这种制服啊？这台湾早期国小的制服谁看过啊？没有吧，对不对？但我小时候那个真的女生制服是这样励志故事书那时候画很多，大概画了半年吧，退伍后半年都在画这个，因为他那个收入比较好然后可是我发现我的灵魂正在慢慢的腐朽，后来我真的画不下去，因为我觉得我不会画图，我已经没有办法画图了那自信心啊或者热情什么的，就是好像真的是一个气球，气被放掉一样，瞬间的干扁掉，然后我已经不想画了，画童书越画越不想画，越来越觉得自己是空壳这样所以呢幸好那个很快的就有机会因为在大概我退伍后不到半年时间，我就有机会接触到教学，然后开始做教学。那教学的话，其实我画稿子的压力就没那么大，更何况我画的方式还是比较慢的。我的所有技法全部是自己摸索出来的，就算看书也算是摸索，因为书上讲了很多内容，它只要藏一两招你就不会了那所以我并没有掌握最有效率的画图方式画的也不好认真讲也真的不好然后也因为接触到教学，所以呢我的那个工作形态可以稍微缓一下就是我不用那么赶着每天这样子爆炸的一直画，对不对当时呢就回来再画看我到底还会不会画图，我喜欢奇幻，我还能画吗？用这张稍微找回一点信心。如果很多人接触过电脑绘图的教学，在台湾最早大概10多年前吧那个时候这张广告在雅虎上常常出现我非常骄傲非常开心看着自己图在雅虎上一直闪那当然这个图其实相当的不怎么样以现在眼光看，可是那个时候我还是必须要画线，没有线不会上色。到了这张才开始改变这张开始我试试看能不能不要线稿，我在电脑里面我也不要什么就是半手工半电脑，不要全电脑，到底行不行？你们当然现在觉得一定行嘛，网络上那么多，对，我那时候哪知道。那这张我要试试看，为什么我必须要这么做？因为竞争出现了，你再不会一定要趴下来。当时的话是我最早那时候第1年教课，在那个我们那个经纪公司派遣到那个联成电脑去教。当时的话呢是我教学生，我都还真的是准备线稿，扫描进电脑变成一个档案，上课时候呢直接放伺服器让学生抓来上色这样。我那时候也这样，最初也这样教，因为我认真讲，当时也不太会教教学是一种能力，不要以为会画就会教，那是2个事情那当时呢有新进的同事其实我在教也教没多久，然后就有那种新人来了新人那就小我几岁然后要到我的课旁听，我那时候很兴奋，哇，有那种感觉上一定要当前辈那种感觉他们完全不用线，就你就看在整个教室里面2个座位来2个新人会师吧他们接触的生态就只玩我1-2年而已，他们整个接触的东西都不一样他们一开始接触电绘遇到就是不用线，无线绘这个名词你们现在很少听说了，可能那时候对我们来讲很新鲜真的可以耶，电脑里面开一个空白档案就直接用颜色去抹，真的做得到我不能输啊，等下我到时候连这个教学工作我都没有了怎么办？试试看一试好像也不难，好像也可以耶，我发现我可以蛮丝滑的转换过来这个时候开始我画图开始进入没有线条的时候整张图我就用颜色开始抹对了，我知道了，你们一定会说这个不是现在很普通，对，我上课也这样讲好，这是我的当时上课的教学范例，你们应该会发现到一件事情，美感还是不怎么样这时候的人物的脸呢，我觉得已经比以前好看很多了。记得春丽吗？刚刚上一趴的春丽记得吗？还记得吗？那个脸能看吗？不能嘛，对不对可是我现在这样，我当时回头看春丽也算黑历史，就会觉得幸好现在这个时候我可以画得漂亮了太开心了，太感动了以后可以放心了，而且躺着过这样不行，现在看还是丑的 对我现在来讲，这还是很黑，相当黑啊。那也是请你们也看一下，我喜欢在精灵后面放花放草啊，记住这个逻辑，我定期几年就会画一次啊。当时呢，确实有一阵子啊，就这也是我们在教课的时候的一个状况，就是如果你是类似领钟点费的话，你会有一种心态会养成，就你不太会再创作新的东西。那要不是说我现在自己课程是自己的品牌的话，有可能是会可能心态会维持当时那个样子啊。画技呢有点停滞不前，因为有点你每一个班就教30几小时，然后重复教一样内容就好了，人生就一直 repeat 的那个很简单的内容就好，所以有一阵子确实有点不思上进啊。那觉得已经不用线稿了，应该就天花板了吧？画技就天花板，就不用线稿，里面就直接开档画，不是很厉害的吗？天真，太天真了啊！天花板还老远的嘞哈！你会发现你人不在10层楼以内，你人要面对的是巴比伦塔啊。然后，因为我有发现自己的画技停滞不前了啊，所以呢，我开始接那个小说封面，又接回来开始画啊。那时候要1周1张，1周要画1张。这个时候都不用什么草稿，我草稿就简单圈一下，用黑线圈一下，电脑里面直接开那个，就是用个喷枪笔，选个黑色圈一下，我说我要画怎么样画怎么样，跟编辑讲啊，讲完他就会被我，就是他必须接受啊，被我强迫说我往下画他能接，他一定不，我应该说，我跟他保证往下画不会丑啊，不会差到哪去，放心，出什么问题我都能改啊，我就是要提出这样的担保，所以我可以很任性的不用怎么样的草稿，颜色就开始啊，那这样子画了好几年啊，我觉得画技有在稳定成长啊，这个是当时那个时期的一张高光图，我觉得画的比较好啊，美感也比较不错，现在看也觉得还行哦啊。那个时候表现的可能网络上比较有机会被看到的，可能搞不好是这张妈祖啊。那也是因为我们有背后还有经纪公司的关系，所以我们有机会配合到一些大的合作案件啊。这是朝天宫的那个妈祖，就他们的一个活动啊。这在网络上是有一个影片的，可能后来好像不见啊。那这个时期我用的软体是 Painter， 好，都还是自学状态，都是用自己摸索来的技巧。网络上不管我看到谁怎么画，我都是用自己猜测的方式，我也不敢去问人家啊，因为自己很倔强。这时候还认为自己有天分，自己的才华是比较好的，所以我都认为不管什么画法，我就是有办法分析出来，我就是有办法把它拆解出来，我就是可以把它变成自己的。所以那时候呢，我就给自己取个绰号叫拷贝绘师卡卡俊，对不对？你们听过对不对？太天真了，很多东西你看不懂，你就是不会画啊，在你面前你就是不会啊，你拆解不了，因为你的观念没有被突破上去啊。那坚持的好一下子硬撑啊，目前这个时候还是在自己摸索啊。那可是，在那个我的职业生涯那个阶段呢，我有幸发掘到自己的另外一个独特的能力，就是画怪物啊，不是他，不好意思，跳太快啊。等一下，下一张啊，准备一下，来画怪物啊！对，这一趴才对。来，我发现我画怪物很顺手，我觉得这些东西对我来讲不难哎，画人还比较难，画怪物很简单啊。我画了好几个怪物，那时候的也刚好也是遮影手一开始，所以有很多的游戏的邀约就来了啊。我那时候真的就是相当忙碌，那我那时候的忙碌状况已经不是刚刚讲的那种每天滚得到这边的那种哦，当然现在相比还是更忙了哈。当时是要画，每个月画好多怪物，那好像是画怪的人相对少，但需求量又大，对不对啊？因为你玩任何东西，玩任何游戏里面不可能没怪物，是不是啊？好，所以我那时候画了不少这些东西啊，这些。我其实知道我的画技有一点跟不上周遭我喜欢欣赏的这些同业绘师，我当时真的知道，理由也很简单，因为他们用的画法跟我是不一样的。我的画法叫我流啊，就是完全自己摸索的。他们的画法可不一样，他们那个时候已经有很多就是到处去学习啊，然后跟可能跟欧美绘师交流，很多他们风气是非常的活跃的。反倒是我自己还陷入一种自以为自己有才华的这种牢笼里面。你越这么想，你越糟啊。所以我那时候已经停滞不前了，我自己没发现啊，明明画的很拼很辛苦，就是没进步啊。当然这个也要回过头再看才知道了。好，那魔物呢是我那时候比较拿得出手，能够跟同业就是一较高低的东西。好，那也是那个外国厂商都会喜欢的东西。我那时候还是有人物不行，魔物来补。我有那个 概念啊。最后一次用 Paint 画应该是这张了。这一张的时候呢，其实我已经发现自己的那种莫名其妙没有意义的那种自尊心，其实一点都不重要，要赶快学习了。很多时候呢，人就是懂的人告诉你一件事情，你要摸索10几年，他一句话你立刻茅塞顿开，没有比这个更划算的啊！我那时候赶快跟大陆的名家黄光年老师学习，就报名他的课啊，然后我一边在台湾教课教电绘，然后画工作啊，一边周六整个下午上他的课。那真的有学就有差，好，那即使他上课，有时候他上课可能会画个半小时，让你自己就是用看的之类的，但是整个收获还是很大，也有可能整个下午我在上课阶段，我大概有一半时间在睡觉，但是呢，听到的部分对我的启发冲击还是相当大的啊。我不一样啊，我真的被我的美感观念被整个开启啊，开始用回 Photoshop 画。因为以前就想 Photoshop 那个运笔那么困难，那个画起来那个就是不像 Paint 就一画哇湿滑，用 Photoshop 画那么僵硬，怎么可能有人弄那个画？但是我就是一直忽略一个现实，大家都用那个画，怎么我就不行啊？然后回来学习之后，我能够画出不一样级别的东西啊，画起来又不一样，哎，这个时候我对自己的现状相当满意啊。但能满意多久呢？也没多久，大概半年吧。半年后又发现自己怎么好像卡住了，又卡住了。所以拷贝会是卡卡俊，不是在拷贝人家的画技，是人一直在卡啊，一直卡。我这时候卡住了。我觉得我在画漂亮的图，问题是感觉上好像有一点扎眼，没有那么顺眼，又卡住了啊。我当时大概卡了1-2年吧，可能很多人没发现啊。我有时候会说，可能大家也不当一回事啊，反正我就卡住了。那你们看得出这个是低潮的时候画的吗？低潮的时候画，相当低潮啊！低潮的时候画，这个叫低潮啊，真的低潮。然后这个也是低潮的时候画，就不晓得该怎么画。那画的好不好？这个行不行？这个画的到底要画完一张图到底要怎么画？完全我陷入了另外一个迷宫当中，跟这种恐惧感已经有那种 PTSD， 知道吗？这以前不就发生过吗？我不是发生好几次吗？怎么现在又忽然间又不会了？怪了，天花板怎么那么远啊？我以为要摸到天花板，没有呢，还很远呢。天哪！打开天窗又是好几楼，不知道怎么办。这个时候呢，跟大家讲一个观念啊，就这个观念是我过去一直没有采纳进来的。你们有发现吗？刚刚的图一路以来到现在，有没有看到任何一张二创？刚刚到现在没有嘛，对不对？确实也没有。不要说这个啊，这个就只是这个是少数的，我画一个初音未来啊。在这个以前，我真的没什么画二创。你们现在在网上看到的，几乎1半以上是二创，对不对？不管是画那个动漫电玩角色，或者是画 B2 都是二创，对不对？二创的风气是很广的。我那个时候就看到，可是我就是坚持不画二创。我不知道是坚持什么的。人生啊，你会怎么前进，取决于你的个性啊。个性像石头一样，你就过得相当痛苦啊。要充满弹性才对。我也希望我现在是一个充满弹性的思维啊。那时候我就因为我不画二创，所以我觉得我的观念一直好像就是我坚持这样做了，因为我觉得要就让人家看到你的原创。画二创，你有1半的人气是原作带给你的，这算什么真本事哦？那时候相当的死板哦。后来呢，你再硬的石头都有东西能够打碎你。我遇到了我爱上的题材，我相当喜欢的题材，不是他，是他。看到他了，他出现之后，我喜欢画二创。太喜欢了啊！这个很多人可能有接触过吧？这个是在座同学们几岁时候遇到的啊？7、8年了有吗？没有那么久，大概5年有吧？啊，他出现之后，我就哇，这个太棒了啊！那时候就真的画得很开心。那也透过画二创，这个是尼尔啊，这种人形，现在不是手机出了吗？手机版出了吗？画这个之后呢，我就开阔视野。你们不要琢磨在像我以前这样琢磨在说身上的造型有多少。盔甲有多少？一般观众可不看这个，反而是你有一定的概念，你在学习的阶段的人，你会以为这个很重要，你会以为造型很复杂很重要。其实有些时候呢，魅力不是来自那些东西，不是来自那，就是有些时候它的魅力就来自它什么都没有啊。那你能不能把什么都没有的魅力也画出来呢？这个是后来 得到了一些启发，就在二创的阶段得到一些启发，然后呢，画到这就又回到自己原创，再来呢，又要那个 repeat 一下啊，又卡住了。你不是画个二创不是好了吗？怎么又卡住了？怎么又卡住了？我一张图要画多久？你们猜？你们觉得这个要画多久？这个要画多久？都超过1个星期。这个每一张都超过，这个好像还画到2个星期，要画很久哎。那我不管有多少想法，我一张要熬那么久，好像不管这张图后来我可能隔一阵子看有多少问题吧，我在当时都改不了，而且要两个星期，每张都一样。像这个就画更久，画完之后呢，它出任何问题我都没办法改了啊。我到底有没有办法在一开始就知道这个组合啊，这是一个天使跟一个恶魔，这个组合有没有更好的可能性？有没有办法组合的更好？我没有办法，因为一画下去，这个是只用颜色画的，一画下去基本上没有办法回头。那要不要先用线稿、线条的方式先试试看有没有更好的组合？好，人生又回来了啊，我又回到了要不要画线稿的这个课题上了。然后大概在3年前、4年前吧，差不多3年啊，我开始画线稿，重新画线稿，用全新的思维去画线稿啊。这时候的线条对我来讲意义已经不一样了啊。这是谁啊？这是真的啊。对，还有这个版本啊，我还画一个这样的版本啊。但这个时候呢，我发现，线条好像不只是线条，线条不是为了上色而用的吗？你要上色之前才有线条，对不对？啊，我们要是能够直接上色，是不是就不要线条？这么想一样肤浅的啊，太肤浅了，又看到了自己的愚蠢啊！这个有没有在下个版本脱光了？有 ，YouTube 不能放，所以没有啊，你们看不到啊。那这个时候呢，开始钻研精线稿。一张线稿要的时间呢，不用彩稿那么久，但是在画的当中，我会体悟到很多东西，细节怎么表现。那这些细节呢，在线稿你这样画，在彩稿你要怎么上色才上得出这个感觉来？当时我发现给我最大突破的，又回到线稿。那当反复人生不停的打脸自己之后，你再也不敢下任何决定了，你也不敢再说，我现在就是很有才华的人，完全没有，我就是个凡人啊，我就是个超级普通的家伙啊。然后人生历练得到的最后的最好的一个结论就是不要太自以为是啊。好，线稿好，线稿阶段呢，这个时候感受到是什么？原来单纯就只要粗细表现、虚实表现，这个就有很多东西可以探索，你就有很大的一个宇宙可以探索。那得到的也不会只有线稿能力，它是提升你整套美感。那我问你们，脸好看了吗？好看多了吧？脸应该开始好看了吧？对吧？最少我现在看不会觉得丑啊。你现在再给我看刚刚的春丽，你觉得我吐不吐？
愚人时代。
觉得你很喜欢享受一些奇怪的帅气，对啊，就摔下来然后朝后面冲。他平常在柏油路这样子会痛，只有木质地板难得做，对啊，练难得做。好，大家好，我是好，我是的，我是愚人时代的强力奇迹大家。最终场了，在这边跟大家分享一个我个人的一个小秘密。有一句话一直不想讲，但是又得不讲的。其实我蛮欣赏喜德的表演的。爽了，太爽了吧！这是我不想讲的原因啊，太高兴了。好了，不用那么爽，好不好？接话，表演嘛，接话。喂，妈妈，这是接电话。这你也看得出来，没什么，赛道的表演真的是蛮屌的。还好，这一定是接电话，不然这是什么吃鸡场？也并非如此哦。接电话。我开始披萨。好 好恶心，好恶心，好恐怖，好恐怖。哦，好抽象，好抽象，好抽象，完全不知道在演什么。这你也看得出来啊？我刚正想呈现就是好恶心、好恐怖、好抽象的吃披萨，是吗？哎，话题好像扯远了哦。刚刚我说到你也很欣赏我的表演，对啊，只是还要讲，再讲嘛，太夸张，没有人这样子要夸的。方式错是不是？对，给我讲哦，你也不要这种方式。我想被夸奖想疯了。好，认真讲，认真讲，就是常来看语言表演都知道，这个喜德嘛，对不对？是一个怎么样会跳舞、唱歌又会模仿，真的很好。谢谢。不会，谢谢。不客气。你再这样我就捶你，好过分！夸你，互相礼貌，有吗？你刚才要夸我，确定？好，我听。啊，有，像你扮演的那个小丑男就很不错，骂人。小丑男是什么东西啊？那个小丑男啊，啾啾哥哥，哪抓小丑男啊？啾啾哥哥，对啊，哎，他很广受大家好评啊，的确啊，那蛮多人蛮喜欢啾啾哥哥，对啊，哎，很多人都说想跟啾啾哥哥做爱，没有人这样讲，太奇怪了。来，该你了，来，夸回来，你刚刚夸了我，就要我夸回去，有吗？啾啾哥哥没有，你没有，你先好，我再补几个，认真讲的好不好？几个好，像是啊，啾啾哥哥他人很好，然后啾啾哥哥他很喜欢逗大家开心，然后啾啾哥哥他总是很欢乐。好，对，你为什么要一直讲啾啾哥哥？你直接讲我就好。对，啾啾哥哥是啾啾哥哥，静儿是静儿，你是你，好不好？不要把这三个混在一起，好混乱哦！我是有多重人格是不是啊？不会混乱，不是什么意思？啾啾哥哥是啾啾哥哥，我是我，静儿是静儿，对啊。那请问中间那个我，我是谁？你不就 Andy 吗？我英文名字一样是我没错，但都是我一样，不一样，不是哪里不一样？像我现在就跟喜德在跟你讲话啊。那请问你现在是关公？关公？你现在这样是关公对啦？好，那我们看一下喜德，关公，对吗？关公这样，对吗？这样关公，不然关公的表演要怎样？不是，关公最基本的要顺个胡子，对不对？然后看本书这样子，大家才知道是关公嘛。他这表演太刻板印象了吧？但至少大家看得出来是关公。好，照你讲的话，关公的表演一定要这样的话，那关公吃饭不就好丑？那关公洗澡，带书进去了吗？带书进去洗澡了是不是？好奇怪，关公弹贝斯，那好适合，关公好适合这样弹贝斯，好适合。不要调音箱，停下来，不要踩效果器，关公好会玩，停下来。不是，你可以分开来。你想要顺胡子就顺胡子，你想要吃饭的时候吃饭嘛，你干嘛一定要一直这样？知道，吃饭的时候吃饭，对，好好吃饭嘛，对不对？对不对？吃饭，对。好，两个给到是不是？给到师傅，怎么？好想顺胡子，好奇怪的欲望，这个人哇。舒服了，吃饭。OK， 好，吃饭，可以吃饭了。吃饭。又想顺胡子，这个。好想弹贝斯，好想玩的一个人。关公太多兴趣了，好不好？不是，我跟你讲，我觉得我要收回我很欣赏你表演。我觉得等一下，我知道，你想看那个传统的关公嘛？对，我知道，一般大家都看得懂那种关公，我知道，传统的我知道，我会啦，可以吗？会啦，我确定了。被上身的关公啊，对吧？有了吧？这传统的吧？到底要的吧？谁表演关公会表演这种宫庙版本的情况？太奇怪了！我发现你是不是对我关公的表演没有意见？不是，真的很 很烂嘛，大家都看不懂。你刚刚在教讲这种对，干嘛生气？没关系啊，对啊，我们在讨论表演。哎，不是科班七，我们讨论表演这种事还 OK 啊，你不要生气啊，回来。我现在就是很不爽，你不要不爽，我现在就不想跟你讲话，你先不要生气，除非你叫那个啾啾哥哥来跟我讲，好不好？除非你叫他跟我讲。大家好！哇，今天现场好多大朋友跟小朋友哦，听说有一个小朋友在生气，是哪一个小朋友呢？是哪一个小朋友呢？是哪一个小朋友呢？我在不爽，你还在那边嬉皮笑脸。不是你要啾啾哥哥的吗？刚刚啾啾哥哥。对啊，刚才啾啾哥哥。对啊。我以为是一个大人在耍幼稚。好过分，不准这样说啾啾哥哥。对，可是啾啾哥哥出来不是都会说大家好，我是啾啾哥哥，这样要报名字是不是？好，大家好，我是啾啾哥哥。啾啾哥哥。哇，今天好多大朋友跟小朋友哦，是不是？听说有一个小朋友在生气，是谁呀？是我。好，生气不用这么踊跃，没有关系啊。你为什么在生气呢？因为刚刚有一个王八蛋，他说我的表演很烂。那有没有可能是你表演真的有问题呢？确实有可能啦。会反省的小朋友非常的好。啾啾哥哥，你可以表演关公给我看。啾啾哥哥最厉害了，拜托你，你最强了，你人最好了，大家一片掌声，你最厉害了，拜托。大家好，我是关公哥哥。嗨，关公哥哥。你好。我想要气球。你想要气球啊？那你想要什么宝剑呢？还是要花呢？我都可以折给你哦。我想要一个张飞的，太难了。我们宝剑好不好？宝剑就好。宝剑就算了，没关系。好，没关系，那气球不要了。那我在那个电视电影看到那个你的武艺高超，武艺高强。有一招我很有印象，可以做给我看。哦，可以啊。对，你做起来一定特别帅。真的吗？我先做一次。就这招。这空翻，给我做给我看。张飞的气球，你想要什么颜色的？黑色的吗？还是要侧空冰淇淋？好吧，你要吃冰淇淋。侧空，我有带魔术箱。侧空翻，还是那个 L 长雷力哥，我也会唱。侧空翻，出下来啊！侧空翻，小朋友好好说一下。侧空翻，大家在指挥游戏了。就是说大吼大叫，他们这样，就这个。